Is it unjust? Yes. I mean, the same law they use to put you in prison, you can't use it to get you out. I mean, in my case, the DNA came back 2004 showing it wasn't me. 20 years later, it takes time for fruition to come about. It's not how TV makes it seem. It's not at all.
Over the past few decades, the innovation of DNA technology has revolutionized our judicial system. It's become one of the most powerful forensic tools available, capable of identifying suspects using biological evidence like saliva, skin, blood, hair, or semen left at a crime scene. But DNA doesn't just tell us who's guilty, it also tells us who isn't. It has exonerated the wrongfully convicted and brought long overdue justice to those failed by the system. DNA was first introduced as evidence in US criminal courts back in 1986 after it was successfully used to solve a crime in England that very same year. And that moment triggered a global shift, the dawn of molecular genetics and criminal investigations. And since then, the growth has been staggering. As of the end of 2022, the National DNA Index system in the US held profiles for more than 15.7 million offenders and over 4.8 million arrestees. On a global scale, an international DNA database now contains the profiles of more than 280,000 individuals from nearly 90 countries. With all this advancement, you'd think justice would be more accessible, quicker, fairer, more accurate. But the truth is, it always isn't. Earlier this very year, a Georgia man finally had his life sentence overturned after spending 22 years behind bars. New DNA testing linked someone else to the crime, evidence that simply wasn't available at the time of his trial. Despite all this, the state pushed forward and secured a conviction, a life sentence for a man who wasn't even there. It took over 2 decades for Sonny Bharadia to get what the system should have delivered from the start: the truth and his freedom. Because one thing is clear, the gavel has fallen. I'm Nichole Mondshein, and this is Final Judgment, a deep dive into the final days, last choices, and chilling moments before execution on Georgia's death row. Some convictions unravel while some sentences are overturned. The evidence has been laid bare, the jury has spoken. But was justice truly served? For some, there's no appeal, no second chances, just the final judgment. But for others, the final judgment isn't so final after all. Sandeep Sonny Bharadia was born in London, England. He grew up in a close-knit family with his parents and his older sister Seema. But despite not being born right here directly in the US, Sonny had a childhood like any other American kid. He loved sports, especially baseball, and was a huge fan of the Baltimore Orioles. When Sonny was just 7 years old, that's when his family decided to move to the United States, settling in Stone Mountain, Georgia, a suburb of Atlanta in DeKalb County. Stone Mountain is known for its massive granite dome, the largest exposed piece of granite in the world. It's also infamous for the Confederate memorial carving depicting Confederate leaders like Robert E. Lee, Jefferson Davis, and of course, Stonewall Jackson. Today, that particular mountain draws visitors from all over, with a park offering a variety of attractions and family-friendly activities. And after moving to Georgia, Sonny was enrolled at Pleasantdale Elementary School in Doraville, and he later graduated from Clarkston High School in 1993. Life was simple and steady, full of family, friends, and the everyday hopes of a young man carving out a future for himself. Well, that is until the fall of 2001. Sonny was just 26 years old at the time and finally feeling like life was moving in the right direction. He just enrolled at DeVry University, submitted all his paperwork, and was getting ready to start classes in the spring. A fresh start focused on school, stability, and building a future for himself.
I grew up in DeKalb County, maybe Stone Mountain. I had a pretty good upbringing. It's like my parents, nobody in my family ever got any trouble or anything, and I've just been the first one. And I guess I've always, kind of tend to be naive at times. I was 26. I was starting to go to the bride to call it snappy. I just actually just enrolled everything, got the paperwork the day all this happened.
But that future vanished in one single afternoon. The The very day he completed his college registration, Sonny was accused of a brutal crime, one he always insisted that he didn't commit. His plans for school were instantly replaced by interrogation rooms, courtrooms, and ultimately, a prison cell. Despite no DNA evidence actually linking him to the scene, and despite major inconsistencies in the victim's story, Sonny was convicted and sentenced to life behind bars. But what's even more shocking, he was implicated by someone who he considered a friend. And years later, it would be that same friend's DNA, not Sonny's, that finally told the truth. But back in November 2001, none of that was clear yet. It all began on a quiet Sunday afternoon, November 18th, in Thunderbolt, Georgia, just outside Savannah. A young elementary school teacher, known only in court documents as JF, had just come home from church. She lived alone in an apartment at the River Crossings complex. But when she opened her door that afternoon, little did she know that she walked straight into a nightmare. A man was standing in her living room, caught in the act of burglarizing her apartment. But before she could react, he blindfolded her. She couldn't see much, but she did catch one crucial detail. He was wearing distinctive blue and white baseball batting gloves, and that detail would later become critical to this case. Much like the infamous gloves in the O.J. Simpson case, these gloves would eventually help identify the true perpetrator. But at that point, her brutal ordeal was far from over, and all she could think of was survival, and what followed was absolutely terrifying. At knife point, the intruder forced her into a closet, tied her to a chair, and stripped her naked. He told her he was with Al-Qaeda. Now, mind you, this was shortly after 9/11, so the fear of terrorist attacks in this country was heightened. The man reportedly claimed that he was only there to steal her computer and a few things to make it look like a robbery. But then he threatened her with a second man, an accomplice who he called Habib, who, according to him, was waiting outside and would kill her if she tried to escape. At one point, the victim could hear the burglar pretending to speak into her cordless phone in a language that she didn't quite understand. But then she heard the beeping. The phone wasn't even connected. He hadn't actually been talking to anyone at all. He was faking the entire conversation. And what followed next was a horrifying series of assaults. The man eventually untied her from the chair and bound her to her bed. And that's when the burglar masturbated in front of her, forced her to touch herself, performed oral sex, ejaculated on her, and then he cleaned up. He wiped up her body, the bed, everything in the home with a towel. Like he was trying to erase what he'd done. But the young woman still feared that she was going to die. But that's when the intruder just left. When the woman finally was able to break free from her restraints, she looked at the clock. It was 2:40 p.m. The attack had lasted a couple of hours, but to her, it felt like an eternity. She scanned her apartment, jewelry gone, her computer, CDs, floppy disk, camera, answering machine, even 2 phones, all gone, all stolen. But the victim didn't call the police, at least not immediately. Instead, she packed up and went to her parents' home in Alabama. Not only did she leave her apartment, but she left the state. And it wasn't until the next day, November 19th, 2001, that her parents called Thunderbolt police on her behalf. The victim agreed to speak with them on the phone, but didn't meet investigators in person until a week later. And that delay raised quite a few questions. Investigators often emphasize how critical the first hours after a crime can be for memory, for evidence, but in this case, a full 7 days had passed. When detectives finally searched the woman's apartment, they found very little to work with. No fingerprints, no semen on the towels were collected. The scene was eerily clean, maybe wiped down by the attacker, maybe cleaned by the victim instinctively. We may never actually know. But what we do know is this: the evidence wasn't helping. The trail was already going cold, almost immediately. And yet, just days after the crime, Sonny Bharadia, who had multiple alibi witnesses placing him elsewhere completely, was arrested. From a college hopeful one day to a prison inmate the next. For more than 2 decades, he sat behind bars until DNA would finally reveal what Sonny had said from the beginning, that he didn't do it. So while this horrifying assault was happening in Thunderbolt, where exactly was Sonny? Well, he was over 250 miles away in Lithonia, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta. At the time, Sonny was living with his parents in nearby Stone Mountain, and he was working as a sheet metal laborer and trying to get his life back on track after facing some time for running a stolen car chop shop. He was out on parole, but focused on moving forward. In fact, that's why he had just enrolled in college. And on the weekend of the attack, he wasn't anywhere near Thunderbolt. So let's rewind a little bit. In the days before the assault, Sonny had loaned his Chevrolet Tahoe to a friend, but this friend had stopped answering his calls. So eventually, Sonny learned that his SUV had been dropped off at the friend's mother's house in Beaufort, South Carolina. When he couldn't get it back, that's when he reported it as stolen to both Atlanta and Beaufort police. So now let's fast forward to Saturday, November 17th, the day before the assault took place. With his Tahoe still missing, Sonny borrowed another friend's car and took his girlfriend, Alicia, her daughter, and his girlfriend's friend, Keisha, and her 3 daughters to see the brand new, highly anticipated Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone at a drive-in theater in Atlanta. The movie ended around midnight, and after dropping everyone off, Sonny spent the night at his girlfriend's place. Then came Sunday, November 18th, the day of the crime. That morning, Sonny got a call. Police in Beaufort, South Carolina had found his missing Tahoe. It was sitting in an impound lot, but being that it was a Sunday, the lot was closed and he couldn't pick it up until the very next day. So Sonny had stayed in Atlanta so he could easily retrieve his truck the very next day. So that Sunday in particular, Sonny dropped his girlfriend off at work, grabbed some fast food, and then spent the afternoon fixing a friend's car and running some errands. And remember Keisha, the woman who went to the movies with Sonny and his girlfriend the night before? Well, she still recalls to this day that she was with Sonny that afternoon because he needed to borrow some of her tools. And all of this would later become part of his alibi.
I think about Sonny all the time. He's missed a lot of his life.
Keisha Pitts wasn't particularly close with Sonny Bharadia when he went to prison 15 years ago, but she is one of the most important people in his life today.
I told the truth as I knew it to be.
Keisha was an alibi witness who said Barahdia could not possibly have broken into this Savannah apartment or assaulted the young woman who walked in on the burglary. Keisha saw Barahdia here in Atlanta.
So I'm like 100% sure if it happened that weekend that he couldn't have done it. There's an innocent man sitting in prison for a crime he didn't commit.
So let's run the timeline. Keisha's memory puts Sonny at her home in Stone Mountain around 9:30 in the morning. The crime happened between 1 and 2:40 that afternoon in Thunderbolt.
Keisha says Sonny returned around twilight. We checked. On November 18, 2001, the sun set in Stone Mountain at 5:32 p.m.
It's 4 hours each way to Thunderbolt, so this means that technically there was time for Sonny to drive straight to the crime scene and then drive straight back. But if Keisha's memory is correct, there's not time for the actual crime to happen. The day of the crime, where were you?
I went to Keisha Pitts' house, and then I went to another friend's house, and I was working on the car there. And after that, I went and picked up the other friend's co-worker from my job. I dropped the tools at Keisha Pitts' house.
Did you have any alibis or proof that came up before that you were with these people?
Yes, from day one, it's like when I got arrested, I told them where I was and everything, but nobody, I guess, tried to research something to the trial. And then years later, I go to trial. And some of the witnesses were tracked down and some weren't tracked down.
And then came Monday, November 19th. The next day, the day the victim finally reported the crime to police. And that same morning, Sonny had a routine check-in with his parole officer. He told them about the Tahoe situation, and they gave him permission to leave Georgia so that he could travel to South Carolina to retrieve it. So Sonny hit the road, riding with a friend in her Ford Explorer. But there was a snag. His friend's driver's license was suspended, so she couldn't legally drive the SUV back to Atlanta. So Sonny had to make a call to someone else who was available, an acquaintance named Sterling Flint. And that decision would change everything. So here's where Sonny's path crosses with someone who would end up changing his life forever. Sterling was in fact living in Savannah at the time, just a short drive from Thunderbolt with his girlfriend. And when Sonny needed someone to help drive his recovered Tahoe back to Atlanta, he called Sterling. The plan was supposed to be simple. Sterling would drive the Tahoe, Sonny and his friend would follow in her Ford Explorer, and they'd all head back home. That's it. Just a simple favor for a friend. But that simple plan set off a chain of events Sonny never could have imagined. Because while Sonny had a solid alibi for the day of the attack, hundreds of miles away, surrounded by witnesses, Sterling would soon become entangled in the crime in a completely different way. And it turns out that Sterling already had a long rap sheet. Burglaries, forgery, giving fake names to police, you name it. In one case, he allegedly broke into the same house 3 times in just over a week. Once, he even brought a U-Haul to burglarize that very same house. So when Sonny handed over the keys to his Tahoe, he had no idea who he was really dealing with. After the two men met up for dinner in Savannah, Sterling took the Tahoe and then vanished. Sonny's car, literally stolen again. Days went by. Sonny kept calling Sterling, trying to get his vehicle back. But nothing, no answer. And when he finally got Sterling on the phone, Sonny asked him, "Why do you even need my Tahoe in the first place? Don't you have a motorcycle?" But Sterling's response? He said that bike he had was stolen too. Then things got even darker. Sterling started calling Sonny's girlfriend, threatening to kill Sonny and his family if he had gotten the police involved. But Sonny wasn't backing down. He soon filed a police report on November 21st for his stolen Tahoe. Then, just 2 days later, on November 23rd, he filed another, this time for the death threats. He did what he thought was right, but what Sonny didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that Sterling Flint had been caught with some of the victim's stolen property. The same victim from the brutal assault and burglary from the Thunderbolt apartment. And soon, this whole case would take a turn that would leave Sonny fighting for his life in a courtroom. While Sonny was filing police reports, first for his stolen Tahoe and then for the threats, Sterling was busy using that very same Tahoe to commit more crimes in broad daylight. And Sterling would be caught burglarizing homes around Atlanta, multiple homes. And in one instance, a homeowner actually saw Sterling leaving their house with stolen items in hand. And then another, a woman pulled into her driveway and actually saw Sterling standing there with a backpack full of her own belongings. And eventually, Atlanta police were able to catch up with him. After a high-speed chase, Sterling crashed Sonny's Tahoe and then fled on foot. The vehicle was finally recovered, Sonny's vehicle, but what police found inside was explosive. The Thunderbolt victim's stolen items were found in the back of the stolen truck. Her luggage, computer, CDs, jewelry, even a pair of blue and white batting gloves, just like the ones used in the assault, as well as a knife and a tire iron. And that's when Thunderbolt detectives were alerted, who immediately confirmed that the items did in fact match those taken from the woman's apartment, and those used during the brutal attack. But here's the thing, Sonny hadn't had access to that Tahoe for days before the assault even took place. First, his friend had driven it to South Carolina, and then Sterling had it. So at this point, it seemed like Sterling was directly connected to the crime. Should be an open and shut case, right? Well, that same day, the victim, JF, was shown a photo lineup, and she immediately picked out Sterling and another man as possible suspects. Now, she couldn't say with 100% certainty who had attacked her. Remember, she had been blindfolded for most of the ordeal, but she did point to Sterling as a possible match. Now, it should have been straightforward: stolen items in Sterling's possession, a tentative ID from the victim, but instead of closing in on Sterling alone, things took a turn, because Sterling denied everything. He told police the stolen items weren't his, that they were in fact belonging to Sonny, that Sterling was just holding them for him, according to him. It was Sonny's truck after all, Sterling told police. So suddenly, Sonny, who was 250 miles away during the crime, was back under suspicion. Now, here's where it gets especially confusing and deeply flawed. Investigators showed the victim a second photo lineup, but this time Sterling Flint's photo was actually missing, and Sonny's was actually added in. And despite having previously described her attacker as a black man, this particular victim now picked out Sonny, an Indian man, as her attacker. Now, keep in mind, I think it's fairly obvious that Sterling and Sonny look nothing alike. And the photo of Sonny used in the lineup was actually about 5 years old, showing him with short hair and a mustache. And at the time of his arrest, Sonny actually had long hair and no facial hair. Even Sonny's former defense attorney would later say that the lineup was obviously biased. He remembered joking with a police chief that Sonny's photo jumped off the page. But there was nothing ever funny about it, because this flawed ID became the cornerstone of the case against Sonny, and while the ID evidence was weak and the physical evidence pointed squarely at Sterling, it literally didn't matter. On November 30th, 2001, Sonny was arrested, based almost entirely on that flawed photo identification. The victim even admitted that she wasn't 100% certain if more than one person was actually involved, and that she hadn't seen her attacker very clearly. But police treated her selection of Sonny's photo as the smoking gun. And get this, conveniently, neither of the two photo lineups were ever turned over to Sonny's defense team before trial. So this meant they couldn't argue that the victim had previously picked out Sterling from a lineup. Evidence that might have actually cleared Sonny from the beginning. Then, just days later, police arrested Sterling too, after yet another police chase ending in another crash. Both men were charged in connection to this brutal assault, but both of their outcomes couldn't have been more different. Sterling took a plea deal. He admitted only to receiving stolen property, not the actual assaults, and in exchange, he agreed to testify against Sonny, despite the fact that all the physical evidence pointed directly to Sterling, and there was none tying Sonny actually to the scene at all, except for Sterling's word. The prosecution relied on Sterling's incentivized testimony and the victim's inconsistent ID. Then, in December 2001, Sonny was arraigned, and at that point, he and his attorney met with the lead detective on the case. And that detective claimed Sonny had admitted that Sterling used his Tahoe, but surprise, that conversation was actually never recorded, and if it was, the tape just so happened to disappear. So now Sonny was facing trial based on secondhand confession that no one could technically prove, a photo lineup the defense never actually saw, and a co-defendant who had every reason to lie to save himself. It was a setup for a wrongful conviction. By May 2002, Sonny's family, who had never doubted his innocence, hired a brand new attorney, Caleb Banks. But this attorney didn't speak to Sonny's original lawyer or do much of anything to prepare for trial. He did visit the Thunderbolt Police Department, but the case file he needed was locked in a detective's desk. And that particular detective, well, he had recently quit, citing corruption in the department. And not too long after is when both of the photo arrays used in the victim's identifications mysteriously disappeared. And then in July, another officer involved in the case also resigned. But this time after it came out that he had lied under oath years earlier while working as a narcotics officer. Despite the internal chaos and signs of misconduct, the case against Sonny continued to move forward. In 2003, Sonny was formally indicted for burglary, aggravated sodomy, and sexual battery. Sterling was indicted too, but only for theft, since he had taken that plea deal and agreed to testify against Sonny. And unfortunately, as you can imagine, Sonny's new lawyer failed him from the beginning, and bad. He didn't challenge the victim's photo ID or even call an expert to explain the unreliability of eyewitness identifications, especially days after a crime takes place. In fact, he said he didn't even know that was allowed. He also failed to prepare Sonny's alibi witnesses, key defense witnesses like the woman Keisha, who, again, was with Sonny that entire weekend. She could have helped establish his alibi, but they weren't prepped, so their testimony came across as inconsistent or unclear. Even simple things like confirming the Harry Potter release date or confirming that she had in fact seen Sonny that Sunday, the day of the attack, literally hundreds of miles away from where the attack even took place, were overlooked by the defense.
I met Sonny because he was working with my husband. They both were doing HVAC mechanics.
How does it make you feel being his alibi and then him being convicted?
Guilty in some way. Wondering what I did or what I said or did not say to watch this happen to Sonny, knowing that this person was innocent, not because I felt it, not because I could 100% even vouch for his character, but because I could vouch for the timing of that weekend. It was indescribable. I can't even put it in words.
For instance, Raquel Edwards, the woman who had the suspended license and actually went with Sonny to retrieve his Tahoe, said she was never contacted at all by the defense, despite Sonny giving her name and contact information to his lawyer. And then there's his girlfriend, Alicia, who was also unprepared. On the stand, she got confused about the Harry Potter movie date, mistakenly saying that they saw the movie a week before it actually had been released. And so that confession actually hurt Sonny's timeline and planted doubt within the jury. And that's not all. At trial, the victim, JF, told the jury that she instantly recognized Sonny's eyes. But under cross-examination, she admitted that in an earlier lineup that she had actually picked 2 black men as her possible attackers. And again, one of them being Sterling Flint. Like I mentioned before, Sonny is Indian, and let's face it, they don't look nothing alike. One of the detectives in the case testified that Sonny had admitted that Sterling loaded the victim's stolen computer into his Tahoe. He also said the interview had been recorded, but actually couldn't explain why no recording ever existed. Sonny's lawyer didn't challenge him on this, or on the fact at all that the detective had recently been arrested for domestic violence. He also didn't press the police on why they failed to verify Sonny's solid alibi. Sterling took the stand and claimed Sonny gave him the alleged stolen items. He also lied, saying he didn't have any charges pending and denying that he had in fact crashed the Tahoe, even though police records proved all this otherwise. Sonny's lawyer had the wrong report in court and wasn't able to correct him. The prosecution let this lie stand. Sterling's girlfriend testified that he had dropped her off at work around noon the day the crime took place, meaning he was unaccounted for at the time of the assault. Thus, he didn't have a strong alibi at all. But Sonny did. Sonny took the stand in his own defense, and he told the jury that he was over 200 miles away at the time of the crime and had even filed police reports against Sterling for stealing his Tahoe and for threatening him. Before the jury deliberated, the judge dropped one of the charges. But on June 27, 2003, it took just over an hour for the jury to convict Sonny of all the remaining ones. Despite the shaky ID, the missing evidence, and unprepared defense, Sonny was sentenced to life in prison without parole.
When they said guilty, it's like my knees shook. I've never felt like that before. It just crushes you.
But it wouldn't be long after his conviction that Sonny's new appeals attorney would connect with Amy Maxwell from the Georgia Innocence Project. And she had actually suggested something that hadn't been done at trial: DNA testing. With court approval, they sent key evidence, including those batting gloves worn by the attacker, to a lab for testing. And those results came back in 2004. Sonny's DNA was not on the gloves at all. Instead, they found an unknown male profile, proof that someone else had committed the assault. But before we go any further, I think it's important to talk about the Georgia Innocence Project because they play a very crucial role in Sonny's story. The Georgia Innocence Project, or also known as the GIP, is a nonprofit founded in 2002 with a simple but powerful mission: to prevent and correct wrongful convictions in the state of Georgia. They focus on cases where new evidence, often DNA, can prove someone's innocence, especially when that evidence wasn't available or even considered during the original trial.
The American Bar Journal had run an article on Barry Scheck's book, Actual Innocence. I remember reading that first article and imagining what it must be like to sit in a prison cell and knowing that you're not guilty. It took my breath away.
Jill and I became fixated on the idea that we definitely needed this in Georgia.
At the time, I was the president of the Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. There were so few innocence organizations in the U.S., in different states.
We spun it and we sold it.
It was an exciting idea, of course.
And since its founding, the GIP has helped exonerate nearly 20 men who were wrongfully convicted. Men who slipped through the cracks of the justice system due to flawed eyewitness IDs, junk science, hidden evidence, or bad legal representation. But their work doesn't stop at court filings. The GIP also pushes for reform, educates the public, and helps exonerees rebuild their lives after release. So when Sonny's case came across their desk, with its missing evidence, shaky eyewitness identification, and DNA pointing to someone completely else, the GIP got involved, and they stayed committed to the case for more than a decade. Sonny's appeal attorney at the time tried to get a court order for a DNA sample from Sterling Flint, the man who, more than likely, committed the crime, but the judge denied it. And that meeting wasn't recorded, and again, no formal motion was filed, so it went nowhere. Still, his attorney did bring in an expert on eyewitness identification who pointed out that the victim originally described her attacker as a black man, not someone of South Asian descent, like Sonny. Sonny's team filed for a new trial based on the problems with the ID and the new DNA evidence, but again, this motion was denied. The Georgia Court of Appeals upheld that decision. But then in 2012, the unknown DNA found inside the gloves was finally run through the National Combined DNA Index System database, a national computerized system used to store and compare DNA profiles from crime scenes and convicted offenders. And it came back with the match, Sterling Flint. Are we surprised? No. But even then, the court refused to grant Sonny a new trial. Why? Well, the judge said Sonny's team should have tested the gloves back in 2003, even though that kind of DNA testing that was needed didn't exist at the time, which brings us to one of the most frustrating parts of the story. The DNA evidence excluding Sonny and implicating Sterling was in fact real. It was strong, but it never made it to a jury, not because it wasn't relevant, but because of a procedural technicality. And here's what happened. Back in 2003, DNA testing was limited. Labs could only analyze visible biological fluids, things like blood or semen. But years later, forensic science introduced something called touch DNA, which allows testing of skin cells left behind on surfaces, aka like the inside of gloves. And that's how scientists were finally able to test the gloves that the attacker wore. They found a complete DNA profile, not Sonny's, but Sterling's. It should have changed everything, but instead, the court said, you knew about the gloves in 2003, so you should have tested them then, ignoring the fact that touch DNA didn't exist at the time. And that's what's called a procedural bar, where courts focus on whether legal rules were followed, even if the truth is literally right in front of them. And in Sonny's case, it kept him behind bars long after his innocence was clear. And it gets worse. Sterling Flint, the man whose DNA was inside the gloves, actually testified against Sonny at trial. He cut a deal with prosecutors, pled guilty to a lesser charge, and served just 2 years with credit for time served. Meanwhile, Sonny, who left no DNA behind, had a credible alibi, and maintained his innocence from day one, was sentenced to life in prison. But Sonny's legal team and the GIP kept fighting. They filed more appeals, but the courts continued to rule against them, saying Sonny's lawyers didn't do enough at the time of trial. And then in 2015, the Georgia Supreme Court upheld the conviction. But in 2022, Sonny's new legal team, including attorneys from the GIP and a group of pro bono lawyers, filed a habeas petition. They argued that both Sonny's trial and appellate attorneys had failed him and that the new DNA evidence proved that he was in fact innocent. And a hearing was held in 2023. Afterward, the Georgia Innocence Project senior attorney, Christina Cribbs, summed it up perfectly. Sonny remains incarcerated today despite overwhelming evidence of innocence in DNA that identifies the actual perpetrator because of procedural problems in the investigation, at trial, and post-conviction. We tried very hard today to ensure that the court sees this and grants his petition. We know that Sonny is innocent, and we won't stop fighting for him until we can bring him home. And that moment captured the heartbreak at the center of this case. The evidence was there. The truth was clear. It seems obvious. But the system had failed Sonny over and over again. Then, finally, a breakthrough. On April 5th, 2024, Judge Laura Tate overturned Sonny's conviction. She ruled that he never received a fair trial and that Sonny's constitutional rights were violated. The DNA evidence pointing to Sterling should have been presented from the very beginning. The photo lineup was so biased that it should have been thrown out. She also found that the prosecution had presented false evidence and that Sonny's defense attorney had failed to investigate or even challenge any key testimony. And in August 2024, after more than 2 decades behind bars, Sonny was finally released on bond. But then, on May 16th of this year, after nearly 22 years of fighting to clear his name, Sonny Bharadia was finally exonerated. The state dropped all charges, and just like that, it was over. Sonny walked into a Georgia courtroom one last time, but this time the weight he'd carried for over 2 decades was finally lifted. The Georgia Innocence Project had been by his side throughout it all. They pushed for that DNA testing when the technology finally was able to catch up. They were the ones to uncover the DNA match, and they stuck with Sonny through appeal after appeal, setback after setback, heartbreak after heartbreak. And together, they assembled a team of pro bono attorneys who helped bring the truth to light and helped a man get justice. And the truth is and was simple. Sonny was innocent from the start. He always had been, but he still lost 22 years of his life.
Nothing ties my client to this case forensically. The person testifying against him as the state's key witness was the only person whose DNA was present at the scene. If the jury knew now what we all know now, I think there's no question they would not have convicted him.
After more than 2 decades of pain, of fighting to be believed, Sonny's story finally came full circle.
I think all I can say is I'm thankful and I'm grateful. I waited like 24 years for this day. My case actually went for trial before you, and I was found guilty. And I've been claiming my innocence from day one. It took almost 24 years for this to happen, and it should never have happened. But I'm just thankful, and that's it. That's all I want to say. Okay.
Why was it important for you to be able to say something and to have that on the record?
I mean, it was important to me because so many times over the years, the same judge denied me. And it's the same thing I said, I'm innocent. It's the same thing my attorney said over the years, I was innocent. And this judge kept denying me. And now my case is getting dismissed in front of him. And I want him to see and remember who I was. It's surreal and it's also unreal. Like, you wait for something so long and you, like, you know, the indomitable human spirit, like, you can adapt, you can go through stuff, you can endure things, and you believe it's going to happen. But sometimes the circumstance will be so overwhelming to where, you know, it's like you're fighting against hope. But it happens and it's like it's overwhelming. But I'm just grateful, I'm humbled by it that finally it happened.
He wasn't just fighting a wrongful conviction. He was fighting for his life. Over 20 years behind bars, years taken by a system that refused to listen, even after science proved what Sonny had been saying all along. Even after the DNA told a completely different story, the justice system and the state failed him miserably. He had been serving his sentence at the Phillips State Prison in Gwinnett County. And yet, after all that time, Sonny didn't walk out bitter. He walked out grateful, free, finally able to breathe again. But his journey wasn't just legal, it was deeply personal. Behind the courtroom drama and legal filings was a human being struggling to survive in a world that had forgotten him. That's what carried him through. Hope. Sonny kept journals during his time inside, writing raw, heartbreaking reflections on what it felt like to be lost and just a number in the system. It has been 5,873 days, 839 weeks, 192 months, 140,952 hours since I lost my freedom. At times, I feel like I'm at a breaking point. My heart won't let me rest. I'm surrounded by wolves 24/7. I worry about my mom constantly. I just hope and pray that this chapter of my life is over soon. In 2014, he wrote, "I can't hold back the tears. Will this ever end? I constantly struggle with suicidal thoughts." And in 2015, "I am innocent. I have been railroaded and all have left me. I have followed the rules. I have been patient, been hopeful, and nothing. By the end of 2017, the weight of that wrongful conviction had carved deep scars. To be fully prepared for something, one must actually expect it. I was never prepared for this. I never expected this. I often wonder whether I can emerge from this place undiminished. The scars and wounds are deep. I long for my freedom. I long for my name to be cleared. I am scared. I am lonely. I am cold. I am broken." Sonny's words offer a haunting, unfiltered glimpse into what it means to live inside a cage, while the world outside continues on as if you just simply don't exist. And through it all, Sonny stood firm. "I want people to see that injustice happens, but it can be fixed. People need to hear my story," he said.
Is it unjust? Yes. I mean, the same law they use to put you in prison, you can't use to get you out. I mean, in my case, the DNA came back 2004 showing it wasn't me. 20 years later, it takes time for fruition to come about. It's not how TV makes it seem. It's not at all. I mean, I remember my appellate attorney, 2003, he wrote me a letter. It was like, "You sure you want to get DNA tested? Because if it shows it's you, that's the final nail in the coffin." I got a sheet of paper. I wrote on it in large letters, "I am innocent." It seemed like you're fighting a Goliath. That's how it really seemed. I'm fighting this 12-foot like Goliath giant, and every time I try to fight, it's just knocking me out. But I've also learned that we go through things sometimes to help people along our journey. Because what we went through sometimes can impact them in life. Like, you don't know what stage they're in life, mentally, emotionally, and you might have went through something, way worse than they did. And by your encouragement, by your words you say, it can be profound to what it speaks to them.
He even turned down a plea deal years ago that would have let him walk out early. 10 years served in exchange for an admission of guilt. But he refused because he was innocent. He knew he was, and he wouldn't lie to get his life back.
He had been given an offer to settle the case, to enter a guilty plea. Had he pled guilty, he would have spent 10 more months in prison. He said, "No, I can't do that. I didn't do this crime."
You would be out if you had taken a plea deal.
Yes.
Why didn't you take that plea deal?
I didn't take the plea deal because the thing was like I'd be saying I did something when I didn't do it. I remember one of my attorneys in the past years ago like, "Do I want the DNA test? Because if it gets tested showing it's me, that's finally on the coffin." I was like, I was innocent. And when he got the DNA, it's like, that was like the empirical proof. He's like, "You're right." I'm just hoping that somebody acts on evidence. I just want the truth to come out. It's like, I'm not the person.
And now, after everything, Sonny is finally free. But freedom after this long isn't simple. The Georgia Innocence Project reminds us that exonerees like Sonny face huge hurdles when they return home, like finding housing, getting a job, rebuilding relationships, assessing healthcare. They're literally starting their lives completely over. Simply just getting help reacclimating to society. All of that is incredibly hard after 2 decades of being behind bars for a crime you didn't commit. To support Sonny's reentry, the Georgia Innocence Project helped launch a private GoFundMe just for him. And the donations go directly to Sonny, not to the organization, and will help cover the basics. So food, clothes, shelter, and the first steps of him starting his life over from scratch. At the time of this episode's recording, Sonny is the Georgia Innocence Project's most recent exoneree, a powerful reminder of the work they do. In the long road, so many are still walking. Because while Sonny's legal battle is over, the road ahead is still just as long. But make no mistake, this is a victory, a monumental one. It's the triumph of truth over error, of persistence over despair, of one man's refusal to give up even when everything around him told him to. After 22 years lost to injustice, Sonny Bharadia is free. He has the chance now to reclaim his life, write a new chapter, and live on his own terms.
I want to start a ministry. That's what I really want to do. I want to go to ministry full time. I started passion for people. That's something I really want to do with my heart too. I want to all my life. I'm a host. Hope and pray to God that I make it out. Just be my mom's final years. You know, just live a normal, productive life. That's all. What I hope comes next, I'm hoping, like at this next stage when I go to court, that some issues are clear up, that they come to light. It's like the evidence is there. I'm just hoping that somebody acts on it. I just want the truth to come out. It's like,
and the man whose testimony helped put Sonny behind bars? Well, years later, Sterling Flint surfaced again, this time as a jailhouse informant in a high-profile murder case against Eric Hurd. But that testimony fell apart too, with Sterling taking the stand and recanting everything. His pattern of unreliable claims has left a trail of damage, underscoring just how dangerous it can be when the justice system leans too heavily on incentivized informants. Sonny's story isn't just about a broken system. It's about the people who keep pushing to fix it. People like the Georgia Innocence Project, groups like the Georgia Innocence Project, like the attorneys who volunteered their time, like the advocates and interns and everyday people who said, this isn't right and we won't stop until it is. Sonny's case reminds us that wrongful convictions don't just take away years. They take away identities, opportunities, and families. But it also shows us that hope can survive even in the darkest of places. And sometimes, just sometimes, justice really does come, even if it just takes time. Every year, thousands of people across this country are wrongfully convicted, torn away from their families, their lives, their futures, for crimes they just didn't commit. Studies estimate that about 4% of the US prison population is actually innocent. And in Georgia alone, that's actually around 2,500 people. I want you to think about that. Over 2,000 people sit in prison cells, just like Sonny once did, knowing they don't belong there. Sonny's story is just one. One man, one fight, one life stolen, day by day, year by year, for more than 2 decades. But even after all that, he never stopped fighting. And when the truth finally caught up to the lies, Sonny was able to walk free. But freedom is only part of his story. Because while release ends a sentence, it doesn't erase the trauma. It doesn't heal the years lost. And for too long, exonerees in Georgia have walked out of prison with nothing. No support, no resources, no recognition of what they've endured, of how the system failed them. And that's why the passage of the Wrongful Conviction Incarceration Compensation Act is such a turning point. For the first time in Georgia history, there will be a clear, consistent process for compensating people who were wrongfully imprisoned. This new law allows exonerees to receive financial support based on the years that they lost behind bars. So before this, exonerees had to depend on lawmakers to push through individual bills. But now, with this law in place, innocent people, just like Sonny, have a better chance at rebuilding their lives after release. This is a landmark moment for justice right here in Georgia, bringing dignity, consistency, and hope to those harmed by wrongful convictions. It's not just about money, it's about dignity. It's about saying, we see what happened to you and we're going to make it right. Sonny held on to hope all those years, all those decades. Even in the darkest moments, when he was surrounded by violence, when he was alone in his cell, when it felt like no one was listening, he held on to hope. And now he's not just free, he's Georgia Innocence Project's most recent exoneree. But behind Sonny are hundreds, maybe even thousands, still waiting, still trapped in a system that got it wrong, still hoping that someone, anyone, will hear them. Sonny's exoneration is a victory, but it's also a wake-up call because for every Sonny, there's someone else whose name we haven't heard yet. Someone who needs the same fight, the same courage, the same justice. Because one thing is certain, while the final judgment has been made in Sonny's case, his story is far from over.